So I've got the process manager and the runner and the process stage all refactored. It feels great. I wanted to explain it real quick while I'm taking a walk. So the idea of a process manager is to organize work in stages. It's meant to be the most basic breakdown of work, and that's so that I can, even before I make an offer, I can say this is what we're into and identify the work that I can see. It can be one step or many steps. This is really useful when we're, mocking out services, of course, but also anything that the system can do, we can start in a process manager. And then work at any stage can be any other kind of work. So the types of work I have, I think this is in, there's a process manager, which is meant to be simple. And then there is an offer, which is meant to be about risk assessment rather than doing the work. And then there is a choice, which is gathering all of the agreements for getting the work done. Who's going to pay for it? How long do we have? What's our outcome tree look like? Meaning, what service levels have we agreed to validate that the work is correct? So it's ready. So those are kind of precursor pieces that allow us to see before we jump. And then the actual doing the work, if it's really direct, like function, like just do the thing, I call that an operation. And an operation has an optional protocols coming in and out. So they have these rather flexible interfaces, or could have. And a protocol is a tree of of transforms. So it's looking for content types, validation, encryption, transport, anything that needs to occur to ensure that we're reaching a destination. Part of that is really about the distributed nature of our systems. Run anything anywhere kind of a thing, but do so in a context that we control. So the protocols can protect us, but also the way that we allow things to run, that's also really interesting. I'll talk about that another day. But anyway, so there's an operation, and then there is a service, and that looks like an operation or a process manager, but with discoverability, accessibility. There are no dead ends. It's following the Ludowns, good services, concepts, principles. So take it on as a grown-up. Allow it to have interfaces, different interfaces for the same steps. Allow it to be repeatable or resumable. Process managers, by the way, are resumable by nature. So the way they work internally is they say, look, the stages exist, but predicates are defined that look at state to figure out what stage are we at. So as long as state can be relied on, any state changes, and the predicates match, meaning the process manager is well tested, well adapted for the work we're asking it to do, it's by nature resumable. So there's process manager, and then flow is the interactive version, where what we're doing is we're saying hand off usually to the one driving the choice, the one making the offer, the one designing the process manager, me, typically, maybe, do the work, or, go, govern this work, go manage this process. And then because we have an outcome tree, which is a set of service levels, so unit-based, ranges, distributions, values, tied to, this tree. So we have priorities and trade-off decisions already pre-made. So I can say, look, I'm pushing for this measure of quality, or this measure of time, or this measure of cost, or whatever. But also, we're watching to see if these other outcomes are available to us while we do the work. And so that way, if there is a trade-off I need to make as the governor of this flow, do it, make those choices if I have to. Or also, because these values can be past, present, future, meaning I can go look at the old stuff, I can look at what's running now, I can look at the predictions, or another way to think about it is it's the budgeted amount, the predicted amount, and the actual amounts. So like all that information should be, findable to those involved in running a flow, so that we should be able to run that fairly well. And then we use observer and our summarizers, which really work on projections, but they work on anything. So what that's telling us is, hey, while we run this, I can set up these criteria, predicates, that tell me if something is in this state. And then if so, use these summarizers under this condition and get it to me. And the protocols there could escalate the message delivery. So now we have a reliable way of saying, I need this information while it's running, so I can be passively observing what's going on. And that's true of any work, not just a flow. We did these things, and here we go. But that allows me to have a different set of criteria, different outcome that I care about, versus the official reason that we're doing the work. Meaning, for example, let's say that the choice was to deliver an application, and the team just wants to go fast because working software is better than great documentation. Show me where it breaks, show me how it works. And that could be their criteria. But I'm sensitive to the fallout of who this could hurt, or what could leak, or what happens when we mess up. And or if we mess up, when we mess up, when things go wrong. So I might be participating in the project, but I'm also observing it with my criteria, so that even though the team is going to break things and move fast, I'm going to say you're exceeding your predictions on the fallout, or you've misrepresented before we started this project what the likely risks were, and we've now seen evidence that this is a problem. And then I can get involved, or anybody can get involved with work that's causing problems. So that's That's work. That's a process manager. So the process manager at its core is kind of simple, but the beauty of it was extracting out the execution report. So it's keeping state on what we're running and why separate from the actual running instance, meaning it's a durable state we can use when we need it. Extracting work and work descriptors out and wrapping all the types of work and making sure I can use the import mapping to find the services and systems that we're depending on to actually run and call and interact with their interfaces. And then query with its matchers and its predicates, extracting that out. A few other things that make it really easy to compose a process manager and then compose the other types of work, reusing some of the same elements, but adding the tools that they need to do. Then if you take a look at that and you say, great, so theoretically it's different or useful, what are the practical things we're doing? So just a real quick summary. The process manager is about the breakdown and the changing of state and the observability of that work. I want this to happen. Can I even reliably know that it is? That's the process manager. And that's runnable. The offer is about risk and underwriting. So we choose the service levels, we choose the capacity inputs and outputs, which are defined in value units. So time, money, durability, exposure, whatever you care about, it's adding this or that. Capacity was designed to be absolutely open in terms of what you need, sources and uses of resources. So it can be emotional capacity. Look, I am not in an L2 break things down moment. I'm in an L1 move fast moment. That kind of a thing. So capacity is being acknowledged in the offer, and then the breakdown is being analyzed for risk and underwriting, is being used to say, this is what we would do. So it could be a managerial protocol or process manager. Protocols are likely applications of process managers or implementations of process managers, but with a couple of clarifying. They'll follow that protocol. Protocols follow the protocol. But anyway, so we say, great, this is the underwriting, this is the hedge, this is the insurance, this is the observers, this is the agreements. So imagine if we're making an offer, we say, look, it's going to cost us at most $100 and it'll be done by Monday. But underwriting to that could say, great, if it's not demonstratable Friday afternoon, this agreement kicks in, meaning control or authority to terminate the project might shift. And so the demo either goes well on Monday or those running the project lose control of the project. So maybe $100 is wrong. We're not going to do that. Maybe over $100, but you know what I mean? But like the ability to say, yeah, I would do that if I can set up these kinds of, constraints to the process. And then if you go beyond that and you say, I have an offer, it's clear what it does, it's clear on its capacity, it's clear on the breakdown. If identified all the risks I can. There's a conversation attached to which might be driving. Do we look at this? Do we look at that? Did we do our due diligence, and show me your homework, so I can actually see, not in an opaque way that it should be right, but in an actual way that's what's going on. And then that's the offer. And tied to that, do your research kind of a thing, can involve these decision tree vectors that we're designing. So these use mutual authorization to confirm the authenticity of the information, and also the containment of that information, so that my choices and my track record are not being exposed to any service or entity that has access to say, oh, David chose to do this over that, but rather David is most likely a good candidate for doing this work, or has a really subpar performance history for this kind of thing. He either doesn't understand the concepts, doesn't have the tools, doesn't have the team, the resources, doesn't follow through, doesn't care enough. It's all talk, no delivery. That stuff should be contained in the choice decision tree, but the way that we wrap it, it's not about airing dirty laundry, but rather it's about showing from verifiable moments in my engagement, what literally can I do, and how do I get things done, and what are my outcomes, so that my relative strengths can be measured. As part of that protocol, we can use it as a first pass, kind of a match parameter. Like, this makes sense to engage this person for this work, or this entity for that work. So we know if it's seen it before, etc. So now you can think about simulacra, you can think about agents, you can think about services, you can think about organizations, teams. The team might have done this, but their key player might be gone, might have left the team. And so you don't know that they could do this again. And so that should be reflected in these decision tree vectors that just give us a sense. But then the protocol can expand to say, okay, I would like you to agree to share this information in this way for these reasons. And then if allowed, conversation deepens. And that can go both directions. So we can say, I'd love to work with you, but I need the details about these things because I didn't think anybody had done this before. And you seem to have done it 46 times. What's going on here? And so you go a little bit deeper, and maybe an LLM was tricked or misunderstood the question. But now we know, and so we're bringing things down into the least surface area required to evaluate whether or not to engage, in next steps. So anyway, that's what that is. So protocols matter, and then the work choice matters, because this kind of information, the choice can use this information to say, yeah, I'd rather do this with this person, or I like the idea of what we're doing, I like the budget, I like the breakdown, it seems correct, our industry radar seems correct, everything seems in alignment, agreements seem correct, I like who I'm working with, but I need this kind of a person or this specific entity in the room observing the compensation for their work to oversee or to report what's going on, is bottled up into the choice. So being able to say yes, but, or yes, and, or just no, those kinds of engagements, that's what choice is about. So we ought to be able to semi-linearly scale higher and higher complexity on, process managers, on offers, on choices from the intrinsic tools and, what we have internally in the system. And then when it comes time to do the work, operation, service, or flow, that tool is simply a wrapper around the choice and the agreements in the choice. So it could be that we have a low probability offer, 2% chance of working, no underwriting available, not even sure we completely understand the risk, and we're going to run it as an operation and not as a flow, meaning just go, because either the budgets are such or we need to know, it's a test balloon to see what would happen if. So, being able to break that down into why we're running it this way. So typically, the way I designed is typically an operation just runs, and then we look at the report. If there's or we have access to all the operational data, including the execution report. And then we have on the service level, it should be self-service is really, that's the target. An entity, we're publishing a service, making it available, the choices to make it available for these entities under these conditions. This is the agreement. It's more like a SAAS model, so that you can have entities come in and engage, and then, because it's a constellation of services, they do this, and then they do this, and they do this. So we ought to support the types of feedback loops and engagements that, match the kind of relationship we have. If it's a transactional relationship, that's different than a, deep strategic co-alliance or a co-op, or, this is the critical survival question for an entity. So that's what services are for, to be able to begin to offer what really can be leave aloneable, or the process naturally brings us back into re-engagement if it's not running as advertised. And then, and by the way, my preference and maybe my enforcement of any service that's being published is that the runs as advertised. That's something I'll be observing and then engaging. Because I can shut down the network if I call it the trust network internally. If the trust is being broken, I can shut down pieces of it, or exclude or limit the services available, or do whole cost accounting and then charge for damages, and use those types of arbitration tools that allow us to pay our bills. So intelligence working definition is awareness functionality. Well, you've got it in the whole system. It's all there. Theoretically, it's perfect. We'll see in practice. And then, of course, the flow. We talked about that extensively. But the way I see flow is kind of like a council of like, or somehow associated entities that have common interests, that we can move something forward, but the conversation's ongoing, and then the dynamic changes, the complexities of a complex system can be acknowledged and handled. So it doesn't guarantee linear scalability in terms of effort in, work out, but it does provide a more or less working feedback mechanisms for what's got to occur. But yeah, so if you think about flows as often coalition driven, the CIA's Guide to Strategy, where we are forming our coalition by setting up an outcome expectation and then the engagement, those three pieces, so we decide what kind of game we're playing, positive sum, zero sum, negative sum type of a game, why we're engaging it, and who's involved, what their exposures are to the project, what their outcome is, and they can have different expectations of outcome. And so they're monitoring various service levels, but just to reiterate, a flow goes out with a chosen outcome tree. That is the governing principles by which it must run. And if it's not being run by those principles or those priorities, if trade-off decisions are being made because the coalition is changing, a new agreement must be in place inside of the flow that acknowledges the change. And better yet, to leave that in underwriting and have it automatically kick off. If we get into these edge cases, then the coalition will break, the support will drop out. So, although that is your outcome, that's because the trade-off relationship between, let's keep it simple, time, money, and quality. We think that your preference for time keeps quality and money about constrained this way, but if it's breaking, then the coalition might break, and the support might break, and the whole project might fail. So, knowing the risk of an aborted or blocked flow, because mid-process it didn't run the way it could have run, and that's fine and fair. Knowing those edges, knowing those trade-offs, what it allows is self-interest inside of the system. We don't have to have everybody agree on my principles, my priorities, but we can agree on what is a working set of rules and principles and constraints that we can rely on. As long as we can rely on those constraints, then our work, our engagement with one another can then go forward.